right, we have a couple people that are still coming over, but thanks for everyone joining online as well. And Chris and I are going to have a conversation about the gift of disillusionment. And before we officially begin, Becky, I want to make sure that this is captured. We're recording this. I want to make sure that this is captured of saying thank you to you. Thank you for all the work that you've done in the launch of this book and really helping with this. And our experience with Bethany House, our experience with Baker, it has been just an absolute gift. So please convey our gratitude to the entire team. And I believe that you know who your true friends are. And Ruben, we're officially beginning here. So we're officially getting going. But Chris and I are just going to have a conversation. And here's what I know. I know that you really know who your friends are in two moments in life. You know who your real friends are in two moments in life. And the first moment is when you're moving and you have friends that show up and help carry boxes. The second moment in life is when you launch a book and you have a book event. Ruben, the fact that you changed your schedule to be here, so appreciate you. And thank you. So this is going to be a real casual conversation that Chris and I are going to have. We're going to ask a couple questions to each other and then really see if there's any questions that you'd like to engage in. Sound all right? All right. Sounds good. Well, Chris, the first question, let's get to the why. Tell us the story, the backstory of this book. Why did you decide to say yes to this project?
Yeah, well, I think at first blush, and how's the audio? Can you hear me okay? Yeah. All right. Okay. And at first blush, this isn't the most optimistic book title ever. And I don't know if anyone else has had a similar experience to us, but the last few years have been rough. And sometimes when people ask me to give a summary of the book, I'll say, essentially, it's a book about nonprofit faith-based leadership being really hard. And that's essentially the book. And so when we initially started working on this project, it was 2019. So we started working on this over 3 years ago, and we were feeling kind of the challenge of what do you do when you reach the end of your own idealism in ministry? And as a leader, like we both have faced those points where we kind of reached the end of ourselves and discovered, what true hope really is. But then 2020 happened, and then 2021 happened, and here we are 2022, and the invasion in Ukraine, where hope has worked faithfully for 25 years. It just feels like it's been a rough few years, and it's been a difficult few years for us personally as well. And so the book, The Gift of Disillusionment, really came out of this place of wanting to learn from leaders around the world who have figured out how to sustain hope amid challenge and amid hardship. And while a lot of what happened in 2020 and 2021, and we can share some of our own journeys there, a lot of what happened was really jarring and very kind of shocking in how it revealed so much of our dependence upon certainty, upon predictability. One of the things we learned as we got to know leaders from around the world for this book project was how that experience is a lot more normal in the places that hope operates around the world, in places where the leaders that we featured from this book operates, where predictability was never something that was expected, and certainty is never something you can count on. So that process of getting to learn from leaders through the research that we did was really foundational in shaping for both of us. But Peter, I'd love to hear you share a little bit of your story, the gift of disillusionment for you. Like, where did it come from? What made you want to invest so much time in this project?
Yeah, and we thanked the Bethany House team, but Chris, thank you for saying yes. Unlike the other books, this one required some significant convincing of Chris to say yes. And halfway through, he said no when we were already in the writing process. And I think that's when he hit his moment of disillusionment in the book writing process. That it was definitely a challenge on that. But I think the two moments for me in the book kind of the recognizing the personal need to think through some of these topics. And the first was the foster care. We tell a little bit of the story in that, but just coming to this question of like, how does anyone do this? It was the hardest thing that our family had ever been through, and there was a lot of hurt. And I feel like with our work with Hope International, we're accustomed to challenging places, but it was a different experience when it's in your home, when it's impacting your kids, when it's impacting your family. And I think that question of, I felt the call to just like, let's give up, like in a way that I've never felt before. But I really, this process, I believe, was an incredible kind of God's grace to have our minds thinking through this, as then the challenges didn't just stay in the family, but then all of the challenges that we've experienced, this became the topic that our minds were focused on again and again, of like, what does it look like to find a hope that is independent of circumstance? How do you actually do that when there's very good, very reasonable, very valid reasons to give up or grow cynical? And how do we say no to that? Is there an alternative? So that to me was the story, the initial kind of prompt. And Chris, again, publicly, I want to say thank you for saying yes. And Jill and Brianna joined us in the research. Great team. We had a couple of interns that joined us as well. And yeah, just really, it was just the perfect timing to start thinking about these themes of an enduring, of a rooted hope, independent of the challenges that we inevitably face in this life of service that we want to be about. So Chris, tell about your, I feel like other than the book writing process, where in your life did you hit, we talked about the journey from idealism to disillusionment.
Yeah.
Where did you go on that journey, and what would you say were some of those moments that you hit that pivot point of disillusionment, and why in the world did we call that moment a gift?
Yeah. Well, I do want to thank you for your patience with me through the process. I do. Yeah, I know I wasn't the most fun collaborator at various points in the project, but I think part of it was 2020 was a really hard year for me. I would say that 2020 was the hardest year of my work career. I mean, of the 16 years that I've been working at Hope, like, it was the worst year for me. And I think a lot of us experienced confusion in 2020, and disappointment and loss, fear, anxiety. And that was really true for me. I mean, adrenaline carried me for a while, but I remember a moment, it was a week of getting emails that were kind of like, each progressively got worse regarding the outlook for the world. And so again, a few weeks of adrenaline, but then it was kind of starting to settle in, like, how this pandemic was going to upend so much of what we knew to be normal. And so I was getting these emails from board members, donors, friends. Here's what we did to, navigate this. We're laying off a bunch of people. We're, shutting down global operations. We're contracting. We're, withdrawing. We're protecting. And it was all like sensible stuff. But I just really began to kind of get into a cycle of, I would call it like perpetual doom scrolling, where I'm just reading article after article after article and researching. And I've always prided myself on being someone that can solve problems, that can fix things, that can find solutions in challenging and complex and messy situations. And this is one of those, there just wasn't a way to do that. And it didn't matter like how much I turned inward and how much I like sought to kind of wrestle this problem to the ground. It just wasn't getting any clearer. And so that process just really ended up, I feel like all of the hope was kind of sucked from inside of me, like sucked right out. And there was one night when Allie and I were sitting on the porch, and she looked at me and she was like, Chris, like, I don't know how else to say this, but you seem depressed. And I was like, maybe not clinically depressed at that time. I don't know. But I will just say, like, I was not in a healthy place, and I was not turning to the right sources of hope. I was really turning into myself. And so what we describe as disillusionment in the book, I think is really captured well by Barbara Brown Taylor when she takes a look at the word disillusionment and says, when you actually pull the word apart, it means the disillusionment. It's the loss of an illusion. It's it kind of revealing of a lie that you believed. And so for me, the early months of 2020 were sort of this really painful realization that I placed a lot of my hope and a lot of my confidence in myself. And I placed a lot of my hope and a lot of confidence in certainty and predictability. And so when those things were gone, I began to just feel, really lost and really empty. And it was actually the process of talking to these leaders and recognizing the ways that they had persevered and navigated that was a really helpful part of the journey for me. And so many of them, as we began to talk with them, just describe this as part of the experience that they have in the places where they work. Leslie, one of our colleagues from Haiti, I remember him saying at the end of 2021, he said, this pandemic is not the first crisis that we've experienced, and it will not be the last. And he said that, and a few months later, there was a terrible earthquake that resulted in the loss of lives of 71 of the Savings Group members that Hope serves, and millions of people without power and losing their churches and losing their homes and losing family members and friends. And then there was the assassination of their president, and it was like one thing after another. And so while in many ways my life had begun to move on, Haiti was experiencing, again, crisis after crisis after crisis. So this process of getting to know leaders in these contexts is really put into context what we know is true about much of church history and about much of the world today. But Peter, maybe you could share with us a bit about some of the scriptural inspiration that came as a result of some of those conversations, because it wasn't just their own stories of heroic perseverance that were things that were inspiring to us. It was actually the surprising places that they found hope that I think was really encouraging to both of us.
Yeah, so we went through the kind of similar methodology to Mission Drift and Rooting for Rivals, of really trying to find within our network, within our friends, who are those individuals that their name kept coming up and again, of being those that exhibit the traits that we're really trying to explore. And so reached out to a lot of individuals. But as we're having these conversations, the context is very different, the country is very different, the sector is very different, but there were these themes that kept coming up again and again. I remember being on one call and just literally turning with Sarah, who is an intern at the time, it's just literally turning, can you believe we just heard the exact same thing in another context? And it really was kind of the echoes of these themes of there is a hope that is independent of the circumstance. And one of those themes we kept coming up again and again, though, was this prophet Jeremiah. And Jeremiah is known for some words that he wrote. It's actually the most quoted verse in the Old Testament. Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. To harm you, but for hope and a future. And my guess is we could find those words on some piece of wall art or something here. They're very well known. And yet when you actually look at the life of Jeremiah and you look at those words, they were penned at a time that did not feel like there was a hope and a future. Everything was falling apart. And so not just, I was on a call with Reverend Frying with Jamiri, but it wasn't just him, but we heard about this prophet Jeremiah again and again, and really looking at his life, it just shocked us of how much relevance there was in his life. What does it look like to have a very clear call in his life when he was a teenager? God had this call that he was going to be a prophet to the nations. He steps out with idealism and excitement, I'm sure, but it doesn't take very long until he realizes he is presiding over the darkest time in Israel's history. All of what he had seen built is now being taken apart in invasion and challenge after challenge. His friends betrayed him. He's thrown in a pit, left to die. He is giving these words that no one wants to hear on that. And yet he kept on in this model of faithfulness. And Jeremiah 17 really became this point that we really focus in on, where it gives these two different word pictures. And it gives those that try to grit it out in our language today. That's what he would have said. Those that try to grit it out in their own strength. We're going to get through this. We've got what it takes. So let's just do this. and those that come to the end of themselves and say, God, unless you show up, there is not a hope. There is not a future. And this beautiful kind of contrast in Jeremiah 17 really became an anchor theme for this, that we kept hearing again and again and again, that our hope is not in certainty. Our hope is not in our ability. Our hope is not in our ability to figure this out. But our hope is in a God who is present in pain. Our hope is rooted in a God who understands suffering and is with us in it, and a God who does promise a hope and a future, but not in our way, not in our timeline, not in the way that we might wish as well. So that really became a dominant theme, but the great joy of just hearing these echoes again and again. But Chris, one of the fun parts of the writing were those conversations. And so are there any particular individuals that you had conversations with that stand out as those that embody the type of hope that we try to write about?
Yeah, so I mean, as Peter shared, like in the book, we ended up, and this was not a part of our design initially. So we had this kind of loose idea of the virtue of hope being something we wanted to discover and learn more about and research. And initially, like, we didn't plan to feature Jeremiah prominently in the book. We didn't necessarily have the same kind of vision for disillusionment early on in the process, but that really came through the research that we did of getting to listen to these leaders and sort of identify the themes that they were sharing, of ways that they persevered through both internal and external challenges they faced. And so then it was kind of the pairing in the book of their stories along with the prophet Jeremiah, that it doesn't provide a blueprint. There's no 7 steps to do anything. There's no, here's a ways to guarantee or bulletproof or make sure that you don't experience any hardship or pain. It's actually quite the opposite. And we just kind of share the stories and allow those, hopefully those stories and the truth of scripture to really permeate and provide encouragement to those who read it. But all of the leaders that we feature in the book are truly remarkable people. I mean, they're not people that you've heard of. They're not leaders that have shown up on, features in magazines or, in any sort of like global publications. Like, these are people that are faithfully serving, mostly like out of the limelight and in truly like sacrificial ways. So one of the people that we featured, who I think is just tremendous, is a guy named Marek. Marek Koharski is from Poland. And, he shares his story very forthrightly in the book. I'll share a few highlights of his story today, but you can read his full story in the book. He was very honest with us in the process of getting to know him, but he grew up and would describe himself as like a troublemaker as a kid. He was in gangs. He got in fights all the time, drugs and alcohol at a young age. Described like the situation in Eastern Europe at the time and in Poland as being really hopeless. And then he had a miraculous encounter with Christ as a young man. Really turned his life 180 degrees and kind of gave himself to the Lord's service, ended up beginning to serve at a church, and then was invited to preach at the church, and then went to seminary, and after seminary began to lead the church that he was in, and then they invited him to lead the seminary, and then he was in leadership of this small seminary in Poland for years. And so he led this seminary for a long time, and got married, and he had multiple kids, and described the lowest point in his ministry having nothing to do with his work at the seminary or of encouraging the Christian faith in a place where it's very small percentage of active Christians in the region. But it was actually a situation at home where he went to check his oldest son into a drug recovery program, an inpatient drug recovery program. And while he was there, learned that his younger son needed to be checked into the drug recovery facility as well. And so he describes driving back from this inpatient facility with his wife back to his home with both of his sons now in this program, and just the heartbreaking, wrenching situation of facing this reality of like, God, I gave my life to you. I've been serving faithfully in this place where so few are following you. And I've chosen to give up everything for advancing your name here in this country. And then this happens, like in my own family. I've experienced so much pain and so much heartache. And he described in that process just the way that which the church kind of rallied around him, his friends, his communities, his peers and colleagues at the university, the ways that they lifted him up in this season, and just the amazing ways that God provided. And he, has experienced incredible healing since then. His sons have experienced incredible healing. But even in the last few weeks, I mean, well after we published the book, we got started emailing again and learned the ways that Merrick and his seminary are caring for Ukrainian refugees who have escaped across the border into Poland. And just seeing the way that this small kind of vibrant remnant in his community has been able to be salt and light in this really dark and tenuous time in the region. It's been, really powerful to just track with the ways that they're responding in this time. So Merrick's story, one right now, particularly given the fact that so much of our attention is rightly on Ukraine and on Eastern Europe. Just really blessed to have had the chance to get to know Merrick and hear some of his story. But for you, Peter, I mean, you got to meet some incredible people through this book. Tell me, like, what's one person that kind of stuck out to you?
Yeah, and then I think we should go and see if there's any questions here. And
that sounds great.
Land the plane. But I will just share one real quick one. I just like Chris said, I feel like there have been so many stories of rise and falls of organizations. There have been challenge after challenge of leaders and organizations. I just was talking to another author, and he commented that they've stopped putting endorsements at the beginning of the book because they had to retract so many of them, which is just a horrible way of thinking about this. So we've seen that. And I think the fun of this project was, let's look for the stories of individuals that no one's ever heard of. Let's look for those stories that are people who are just getting after it in a humble way, in a humble posture, and their service can be measured in decades, not in years, not in months, not in this incredible rise in this platform that suddenly exists, but like the slow burn of service, and they're still doing it with a joyful approach and attitude. Let's tell some of those stories. Let's get airtime for those stories that we would love to displace some of the other stories that seem to dominate headlines. And that was a life-giving thing. There are, certainly some scoundrels, and there are a wonderful group of individuals too. I was talking to one before we talked. He said, we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, but it also feels at times that we're surrounded by a great cloud of scoundrels at the same time. And just like this recognition that there are, a lot. So I love the opportunity to have those stories. Joanne Lyon, I believe we feature her early on World Hope International, but I met her at a college commencement, and again, she'd been doing this for years, and there was a lightness, there was a joyfulness. Dana, have you had spent time with her? Okay, man, she's a delightful person. And then you start hearing her story and realizing she was doing everything possible to get her husband to leave the church. She was in Ethiopia when the church turned its back on those that are in need. She had every reason to grow cynical with the church. And yet here she is in her 80s, and she is still has this youthful joyfulness about her and about her service. And for me, those are the stories that really allowed us to say, like, what is at the source of that, Joanne? And for her to be very honest with those moments in her life that she said, if that's the witness of the church, I don't want to be associated with that. Those moments of like true disappointment, true disillusionment, and yet somehow being able to disaggregate the actions of a few with the witness of the church, and still serving, still loving, even though she had many reasons, to kind of give up or grow cold or grow cynical. So that to me was the great joy of this writing process, those opportunities to hear those stories and dive into them. But in our remaining time, I'd love to hear, is there anything that we could try and share? Any other questions on the book or thoughts or prompts? Ruben, I'm so impressed you came with your book and with sticky notes. I mean, that's impressive.
I am reading this book very slowly. I'm very literally, as I got it, I just like going through it. I think one of the things that I don't believe God works in coincidences. What I mean by that is, like even in this space, I don't know how many people expect to be. God made it that I would be here. So I think sometimes we're so living in the West. I spend so much time here. Some days I'm like, but there's this concept of numbers and results. And sometimes when it's like, what is the purpose you have? I feel that I don't feel that. I just gotta say, maybe you guys were just here so that I could, because the way it worked out, I had no clue you guys were gonna be here in Grand Rapids again for something completely different. I was just going through Facebook and saw that you guys were here, and just because I just appreciate that you said the level of stories of regular, everyday people who are grinding every day for the gospel. I've been very privileged in my life to see that without in Africa, in Chad, in Zambia, and they don't get their stories told. And I think that, yes, as believers, we do disservice when we don't look at the least of these who are carrying out the gospel without the resources, without the attention, go every day, believing God in ways that at some point, I was telling somebody, I'm more saddened for the rest than I am for those who are not blessed. Because they live in such a situation that they have to depend on the daily bread for this God we talk about. I think with Chris is good to meet you. I've seen the pictures here a couple of times and stuff, but you get into this thing that you look to yourself for all of these things for every day. And number one, that gets tiring and it's unsustainable if we understand the gospel is very well. Because you will come to the end of yourself. Yeah. And everything you built and cared for and strive for will one day come to dust. And then what will you have left? And all you have left is, like I talk about legacy. What have you left here through your children, and through the gospel, and through impacting people's lives? And so I shared a little bit. I went through a very, very difficult situation. I mean, I have never been so upset and angry and disillusioned in my entire life. And so to be at July 4th will be our year, on July 7th will be the year, will be 1 year since we left. And to see what we've come through, my wife is doing better, we're down in Dallas, I'm doing much better because I was not in a good place, I'll be honest. So this book came from because I have rooting for rivals, and I was gonna read that, but I was like, and I read something else, and then this book came through, and it's just, I think it's God's timing. It's not, I know you guys are authors and stuff, I don't get into all the greatest, like what is the essence of what is being written about? And a lot of that resonated with me. Say that I have two options. I can either be disillusioned, or I can remember what Christ already talks about in Scripture. I think as Christians, we forget about this. Right? If you forget about that, when you follow Christ, the world will be against you. You'll be looked down upon. There'll be difficulties. Like count the cost before you walk with the Lord. And secondly, I think we deny persecution. And that the gospel is I said it to a friend real quick, is that we've won war. No, the war's won in battles that will be lost. Right? So Jesus Christ already came, he died on the cross, forgiveness of sins, and salvation. And then all these other things that we're gonna go through, we hold on to him. Some will win, some will lose, but at the end of the day, we will be with him. So that's just my comment on that has walked me through and looking upward to him and not inward. Because if I look inward, in a scorched earth type of rebellion. So.
And thank you for sharing that. And there was an intentionality, Ruben, in terms of which are the stories that we're going to tell. And you know this, but there can be a tendency to say, we're going to associate that in the West, we have the formal education and financial resources, so we're going to be the teachers. And that just misses out on incredible wisdom of our brothers and sisters. And let's listen, let's learn, let's go to school, being led by some of our global friends, and that was the fun part of the process as well. But then your other point, Chris and I have commented on this, that we wish it did not feel in some ways like such good timing to have a book on disillusionment. Like there's no celebration on that, but 3 studies that have come out after the book came out that were really surprising. The first was the Barna poll that found that 38% of pastors are considering quitting and leaving the formal ministry. Teachers, almost 50%. American Psychological Association had a study. Almost 50% are daydreaming about leaving their school or leaving their space. Healthcare workers, almost 50% are leaving. So, like, this is a tough time. This is a really tough time for a variety of sectors, and so you're not alone in that moment of like right now. There's a lot of valid reasons to feel discouraged, disappointed, and disillusioned. And so instead of running away or pretending that doesn't exist, is it possible for us to maybe take a step back and say, what's at the source of this? Why are we feeling this way? And can we shift our perspective on that? But yeah, thanks for sharing. Any other comments or questions?
So you talked about, Chris, doom scrolling. What kind of advice or counsel or thoughts do you have about health in that balance, or because that's an ongoing wrestle, and it really impacts how we perceive things, and our own sense of discouragement, or so I just wondered, look for some thoughts around doom scrolling.
And is that Debbie Berkey? It's a little bit tough to hear, but it sounds like Debbie Berkey asked that question. So, thanks for being here, Debbie, and for the question. It's nothing, I would say, all that novel in terms of recommendations. I do think that we are shaped and discipled by what we observe and look at. And, for me, I think I had fallen into a really, really dangerous trap of prioritizing reading the news over prioritizing being quiet with God and with his scriptures, with family and friends. Like I remember one of these days in the midst of that season that was really rough. I was returning from the zoo with my family, and I was just reading through articles like the whole drive, and my kids were talking to me, and I was like reading through articles in the drive. Allie, my wife, was driving, and I'm just reading through articles, and it was like I just have one more to finish up, and there was this sort of disappointment in my conversation with the kids and Allie of what is so critical, like what is so urgent and time sensitive that you're not going to be with the people that you're here with. And so I think that is a big, for me at least, was like, I'm not saying that's true for everyone, but for me, really important to have strong boundaries on technology, that I'm waking up before my technology is waking up. I'm waking up and having time where I'm not, jumping on to, the New York Times or Wall Street Journal first thing in the morning, spending time, listening to God and listening to his scriptures before I'm spending time, on social media or on the news. And then I think the second thing, again, that was just really formational for me was like getting outside of my own experience. So, Allie and I had, as you know, Debbie, this experience of launching this little backyard school in the midst of the pandemic and inviting 8 kids from our local public school to come and do virtual school in our backyard. And then we did, lunch and had like recess for multiple hours a day and read books together. And it was it was a really stretching thing. We were so tired every night. We were exhausted by this thing. Like, why do we, it was just like crazy. And yet it was like, when I look back, that was such a pivotal moment because it sort of took me outside of my own mess and helped me just serve and kind of get involved in other people's lives. So those are the 2 things I would say were helpful for me. I can't say they're a prescription for others, but we're certainly like being able to be really invested in the lives of other people, particularly those who are most vulnerable, was really powerful for us in sort of reshifting our perspective.
And if I could add one more, I really in our work, right? There's a lot of heavy stuff that we deal with. And I think the holy habit of joy and celebration needs to be part of what we do as well. Challenge after challenge, if there's not those moments to also celebrate, to laugh, to be silly, like to have those moments of delight in this, and not just constantly, this is what's wrong, and this challenge, and did you hear about this moral failure, and then this organization, like, let's find those moments to also celebrate and joy with the beautiful things that are happening, with the life-giving moments, and not missing the moments of seeing someone reading a book, you know, like those moments. I mean, that's a good one. That actually is the perfect book that you chose here. I love the Berenstein Bears. But yeah, like those moments of also like, let's find the joyful moments in addition. Not that we turn away, that we don't miss, and we don't mourn and lament. We have to do that, and we have to rejoice for those who rejoice too. Yeah.
And I think I'll just add one more quick thing on that. I do think that there is the reality in the world that we live in right now, where every issue and every place can be proximate to us, even if it's not. And the reality is that every day for the rest of life, there will be terribly tragic stories, issues, problems, challenges unfolding in corners all over the world. And you know, we've all heard the stats about the amount of information that we're able to consume in a day compared to those people even 20 years ago or 40 years ago. And so we just have to, I think we have to name that and recognize that. And part of that is recognizing that I can't be deeply invested in every issue. I can't be deeply invested in every country and every community, know exactly what's going on. And it's humbling at times to admit, like, yeah, you know, if someone brings up a topic or they bring up something, like, I haven't done a whole lot of research on that. Like, I don't really know, like, help me understand it. Like, help me understand how that, you know, that specific community in Nepal is navigating the dry season. I just don't, I haven't read about it, you know, help me understand it. So I think there is some work that we have to do of building boundaries, not that we isolate ourselves, like Peter said, like, not like we're not like turning a blind eye to the challenges in the world, just recognizing that we're not God, and we are finite beings, and we can handle a finite amount of information and a finite amount of challenges and issues. And so if we don't recognize that, then we'll assume that we can, you know, finally get to the bottom of it and figure out everything and be well informed about every issue and all the complex stuff all over the world. I just don't think that's possible. I mean, it isn't possible. So if it isn't possible, then what does it mean? It means we have to have boundaries, and we have to figure out ways to go deep in the places where God has planted us. But that's going to mean that we can't go deep everywhere.
I want to add, I like that last statement because I think it's powerful because it's universal. What I mean by it is I really try to think, since I've lived around the world, lived in different cultures, I really try, and when it comes to the gospel, I have to really think of them as universal. Saying that if my Christian brothers and sisters in America, how does that relate to somebody in the normal church? Because our faith ought to be universal. And then we have all the cultural stuff. But I think, you know, Chris, what you're talking about is that when we're in, whether it's development, Christian development work, or any type of work, that we're always looking for solutions and the term solve. And to your point is that we're not going to get there. And we then drive ourselves crazy trying to achieve sometimes it's arbitrary numbers or goals or whatever it is. And now my question always becomes, it's not like we don't do it, it's like, then to what end? Like, let's say you solve it, then what? I think you may not find any satisfaction. It's in the journey, in the obedience to the person of Jesus Christ is. And who tells us that in this world you will have troubles. That's it. And none of this stuff is going to be solved or won't be done until Jesus Christ comes back. And I think sometimes with Christian world, we lose sight of that. And then we end up acting like the world, and then we get frustrated.
Yeah, I think one of Peter mentioned earlier, like Jeremiah 29:11 being one of the most popular verses, most shared. YouVersion says it's always 1 or 2 with John 3:16. But I think that promise from Jesus is probably like one of the least popular, which is that like in this life you will have trouble. It's just not something that my friends send me, inspiring Instagram memes about. It just doesn't show up a lot of places, and yet it's just as true, right? So yeah, I think it's a really good point of the reality that we shouldn't expect life to be comfortable and easy. That's just never a promise that we're given.
That was leading to a question. How do you guys as an organization keep your staff and the people mind focused on that? Like, see what you did, Chris, like you can easily, how do people focus on God? Like, that even if we don't have the outcomes, that we know He's moved in those places, we trust that somebody's getting impacted. And even though you may not be able to put it on a report.
Yeah, I mean, there's some practical things that do help with that. And I think one of the practical kind of ways is the gift of prayer, that we know that we are in this life you have challenge, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And what we see consistently is not always rescue, but we see God's presence. Psalm 23, so famous, right? Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear, for you are with me in that. And I think prayer is this incredible tool to remember God's presence even in the midst of challenge. And if you want more on what that actually looks like, who you're sitting next to there, Debbie leads the prayer team there and is exactly the right person to share more. Yeah, you had a question?
I was an intern at Hope International. I had an awesome experience. And first 30 minutes of my day at least was spent doing prayer every single day. Our internship was a really amazing change of pace for how we typically walk through a day of work. And for me, that's kind of reset some of the focus, kind of where my attention was during that period of time. It really helped as a college student kind of lead me in a direction that was less towards achievement and towards perspective. So even question about like how do you lead your employees and people, I felt that firsthand being there for summer. And I can definitely tell like having big goals and things that you're trying to achieve definitely came second to pursuing a relationship with Christ and trying to build mentor-mentee relationships. And when I was there, really powerful. So I haven't read the book. Yeah, I can't believe I didn't even know you were going to be here. I just figured, what's the chances I live 10 miles away? I might as well come. So
Great to see you. Thank you for being here. Awesome.
I also just wanted to mention after hearing Debbie talk about your gathering and starting with lament, I think that's another unused tool in the Christian toolbox, because I think sometimes, especially in our culture, there's a push for optimism, right? Yeah. And optimism is not the same as joy, I guess. I feel like that lamenting piece is really important too. That it's reality, right?
Yeah, one of the things that I think all of us and Jill, one of our collaborators in this project, wrote this amazing Christianity Today essay about how she really didn't like the book of Jeremiah before getting into this book and getting into this project. But one of the things she described is how it's a tough read. I mean, it's not the most at first blush, it's not the most positive text. And Jeremiah, we believe, also wrote Lamentations, and for not accidental reasons, more words are written by Jeremiah than any other biblical author. Jeremiah is by word count is the longest book in the whole Bible, and again, like more words authored, and one of the whole books is on lament. And if I heard the comment correctly, like that's a lost tradition in the church, and I think like we shouldn't gloss over the fact that that's true. I mean, a lot of the Old Testament prophets, which is, if you're just looking at sort of the page count of the scriptures, is committed to lament and very significant lament. Many of the Psalms, a lot of the Old Testament prophets, it's just grieving the state of the church, the state of God's people, the state of those that are following him. And not just those books being dedicated to that in prayer, but then the stories of the people that are featured in the book. I mean, all of them are, they're not stories of just like highlight reels, right? They're stories of real people who experienced incredible beauty and joy, and incredible heartache and disappointment and sin that is just not hidden at all from God for us. And I think that's to give us a little bit of perspective that, yeah, this has kind of been true since the beginning of time. And we need to be a people that recognizes that that's in us, and lament should be a part of our regular routines, because the same thing that we see in Jeremiah and Noah and the whole way back, the same things we'll see in our own heart, in our own communities, in our own organizations. Peter, I know we're like running up against the end of time here. I don't know.
Run out of time. We got one final. Was that a comment, Debbie?
I was just gonna say, having just come from Malawi, we had to read an article about lament in Africa. And it was saying that, and I wish I could remember the African theologian, but he was saying one of the reasons that Africans, I mean, it's a big generalization, but have been able to handle the crises is their ability to lament. Like you talked about how they wail, they're like really being able to express themselves more in that place, and that really has a lot to do with hanging in there for the long haul, having joy.
That's great. Wow. So, Chris, send us one final word in closure. Give it to us.
Wow. Don't lose hope.
That is it. Chris, such a gift to work with you on this project. Thank you. And for those of you that joined us tonight, thank you so much for being here. And one more time, Becky, the Baker team, the Bethany house team, just top notch from start to finish. So huge appreciation and respect, for you and the team that you work with. So thanks, everyone. I'll be around for a little bit more, but any final announcements? All right, great. Thanks. Everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you so much.